Hi there my Patreon supporters, so this is a Patreon specific video and I made a passing reference a couple of videos ago to using one of these sort of maces in home defence. Well, first of all, I have to caveat any kind of comments like that because in UK law, and I'm not qualified to give any kind of legal advice, I have to say this, I'm not a lawyer or anything like a lawyer. And so don't take legal advice from me, but in the UK you are not supposed to legally prepare yourself for a home invasion. You're allowed to defend yourself with appropriate force, even to the point of killing someone if you believe that your life is at risk or that of your family. But you're not allowed to prepare yourself in terms of have a weapon ready, because that would be premeditation, as I understand it. But I'm not a legal expert, so let's move away from the legal stuff right there, but that's just my caveat at the beginning of saying this. But do I think that a mace would be good for defending a home? And I have to say, by and large, I don't think it would be really great, no. As you probably gathered from previous videos I've done, I actually don't think, generally speaking, maces are great weapons. There is a reason that the police use truncheons, which are a form of mace, and that's because they're very often non-lethal. Yes, you can kill someone with a truncheon. Yes, you can definitely kill someone with a mace, because a mace is like a more dangerous truncheon. However, as I've made hopefully really clear in previous videos, I think something that's got an edge or a point is generally far more dangerous to a civilian unarmoured person than a mace is. I really see maces as playing a role either where things like swords or knives aren't available. So if we look at some primitive cultures, they might use their only bit of metal to put on a spear. Good. That is the best thing you can do. If you've only got one piece of metal, and metal's really precious, the best thing to do with your piece of metal is stick it on a long stick and turn it into a spear. That's the best thing to do. Equally, if people are unarmoured and running around, but you do have the ability to use knives and swords, you should use knives and swords, and that's generally speaking what people did. If you only have a little bit of steel and it's limited to sticking it on the end of a spear, then your backup weapon, indeed something like a tomahawk or a stone-headed club, or indeed a club of any kind or a mace, might be a good backup weapon if you can't have a sword or something. However, in a medieval context, when maces really came back and got popular, in my view, is due to armour. And armour is a game changer, just the same as shields are a game changer, and armour is a game changer. And if shields come into play, for example, it changes the relative effectiveness of spears, and indeed of missile weapons, of bows. Okay, if none of your opponents have shields or armour, then bows are insanely effective because you can just shoot them to pieces before they're anywhere near you. Equally, if none of them have shields then or armour, then things like pikes might be very effective against them. However, you know, if we look at phalanxes, for example, in the sort of Greek and Macedonian Spartan period, before pre-Roman period, then phalanxes of people with long spears and shields, very effective. The shields help protect them against missile fire, missile shooting. I don't like the word fire in reference to non-firearms. And the pikes mean that they're very effective, that neutralises cavalry, and they're effective against each other. But of course what the Romans did is the Romans came along with really big shields and better body armour, and that neutralises the effectiveness of the pikes, and means that they can just basically steamroller into the pikes and then use gladiuses at really close range. So it's this paper, scissors, stone, or rock, paper, scissors, depending which you call it, kind of analogy. Something is neutralising something else the whole time, and for me, maces aren't actually really effective weapons unless you're fighting against someone in armour. And the reason is because armour neutralises the effectiveness, the usual effectiveness of a sword. So in an unarmoured scenario, there is a reason that for centuries the sword has been considered the sidearm par excellence, for wearing at your side, hence sidearm, against unarmoured people in a civilian environment or duelling or whatever, because it's basically one of the best sidearms you can get. Certainly better than a mace. Maces would be far cheaper, and if maces were better than swords in that context, then maces would have been used in that context, but they weren't. Where maces were used was in war against people wearing armour, and wearing armour neutralises swords to a large extent. Not to say you can't do things against someone in armour with a sword. Certainly you can stab into gaps and all this kind of stuff, or cut into gaps if there's gaps to cut into, if they have open face helmets or don't have armour on their arms or legs or this kind of thing. But if they have full plate armour, for example, then you're really stabbing into armpits and groin and back of the knees and any kind of gaps around the helmet, this kind of stuff. So it's very difficult to wound someone in armour if it's all-encompassing armour. But a mace enables you to hit with a huge amount of force, same thing with a warhammer or a poleaxe, huge amount of force into pretty much any part, you know, head, joints, limbs, not so much into the torso, but particularly limbs, neck and head, with huge amounts of force, and you're more likely to have an effect on a person in armour with this top-heavy kind of bludgeon than you are with a light sword. Hitting someone with swords can do very little armour. So, home defence, bring it back circle, home defence, you're not going to be coming up against an armoured opponent. Okay, you're going to be coming up against, usually, you're going to be coming up against an unarmoured opponent, assuming that they even want to fight. So this is essentially a fantasy scenario, someone who breaks into your home and who is a lethal threat to you, so you need to meet that with lethal force, and they're not wearing armour and they're not going to run away. Yes, a hammer would be fine. Yes, a mace would be fine. Basically, the closest thing to hand would be fine. But if you have a choice, I would say a sword, or preferably something even shorter that's a bit more handy in a house, like a large knife or a cutlass. I'll just grab one, as you do, because I know you've all got a cutlass behind your camera. There we go. So something like that would be vastly more effective than a mace. Even if this was smaller, even this was only a short, you know, the same length as the mace. The fact is that this is edged all the way up, it's got point on it, and it's got a handguard. Even if you don't have the handguard, something that's just edged and pointed, you can offend someone in so many ways. And importantly, in a very close-in situation where it's almost grappling distance, anything that requires you to swing like this means at the moment of you doing this, someone can grab your arm or grab the weapon because it's not edged as well, remember, or just block if needs be, block with their arm. You might break their arm, but at that point they might then be able to get a grab on the weapon. So there's all sorts of things you can do against a mace in a close-in situation that you can't do very easily against a sword or a knife. The sword or the knife is more likely to remain free and is more likely to keep offending. And also remember, stabbing in particular, stab, 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 stab with a sword or a knife is much quicker than trying to reload a mace after every hit. Not saying the mace is useless. If you get one good hit, bam, into someone's head with a mace, they're out of action. Okay, that might be all you have to do. But if you don't get that one good hit in, it's a bit like a massive kind of roundhouse kick. If it doesn't land, then you're left massively vulnerable, and it's a relatively slow and cumbersome weapon compared to a bladed weapon. Cheers, folks. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, follow us on Facebook. You can buy t-shirts through Spreadshirt, support us on Patreon, or follow us on Pinterest. Thank you.